My name is Rinka Bralo, and I'm from Migrants Organize. And I want to welcome you all on behalf of Migrants Organize and our team who worked really hard today to make this happen. This event is part of 10 years too long week of action, which started on Monday. And it's just one of many events around the country organized by the Solidarity Knows No Borders community. And I know we look a bit uniformed in our t-shirts, but there are plenty of them for you to take away. And the actions include joint effort and impressive mobilization to stop the flight to Rwanda on Tuesday. So a massive round of applause for that. And it was a joint effort of organizers, communities, lawyers, trade unions, the UNHCR, civil society, faith leaders, including bishops and archbishops, artists, members of the public, and including royalty. So, you know, there is expression in organizing, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not in coalition. So there is this massive coalition that pulled together, and I think it just says enough about that. And there are many ways you can all join in actions this week, and every week, and many months to come, because what we're facing is not going to go away just like that. And you can find us on social media, online, and you can talk to the team or anyone wearing the t-shirt. And of course, you can join as volunteers in your communities and mentors, and you know, there are many different ways to be involved. And if you're able to do so, you can also donate some money to Migrants Organize. And all donations are always spent on direct support of people in need. So today we're taking a long view back, but we're also planning for the future. And the future we want to build is a society based on dignity and justice, and that work is already happening. So you will hear more from our panelists, Marjana, Lorraine, Erfan and Nanu, about how they're organizing already and how they're building resistance and resilience in our communities around the country. But first, it is my pleasure to welcome an award-winning author, Kamila Shamsie, born in Karachi and now living in the UK. And we're delighted to welcome her mum and dad and sister who are visiting London. So that's an unusual experience after 2 years that we had. So Kamila's most recent novel, Home Fire, won the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2018, and in 2013, she was named a Granta Best Young British Novelist. Her work's been translated into over 25 languages, so no one here has any excuse not to read them. So Kamila is a fellow of the Royal Society of Literature and a professor of creative writing at the University of Manchester. Kamila's new novel, Best of Friends, will be published in September this year, so look out for that. So we're honored and delighted that she is here tonight to deliver our first annual lecture, 10 Years of the Hostile Environment, from Go Home Bans to Rwanda Plan. Please welcome Kamila Shamsie.
Thank you, Zrinka. In 2001, the Nobel laureate Abdul Razak Gurna published a novel called By the Sea, which is the story of Saleh Omar, a man who arrives at Gatwick Airport as a refugee. The border official he speaks to says that his parents too came to Britain as refugees. Then he says, "But my parents are European, they have a right. They're part of the family. You don't belong here, and we don't want you here. We'll make life hard on you, make you suffer indignities, perhaps even commit violence on you." Omar is far from unaffected by this diatribe, but he carries within him an important piece of information that allows him a sense of relief. He knows that by the British government's own rules, he is entitled to asylum. And though the official might spew racist language, he'll have no option in the end but to stamp Omar's passport and allow him through, as indeed he does. I've read the novel twice, 20 years apart. The behavior of the official becomes no less appalling, but even so, I read the Gatwick scene very differently the second time around. In Priti Patel's Britain, I was struck by how fortunate Omar was to encounter laws that are better than the people whose work it was to enforce them. Reading further on in the novel, I found myself thinking how doubly fortunate he was to be sent to a place which, in his own judgment, was rather melodramatically named a detention center. There were no locked gates or guards, nothing but a lack of money and options to keep people from going elsewhere. Fortunate is a very strange word to think about a man subject to racist abuse, sent to live in a freezing cold camp with hardly any amenities, deprived of his money and papers on arrival. That fortunate remains nonetheless the word I think about him is the consequence of many years of UK policy towards its refugees and other migrants. This year, as you all know, the year of the Rwanda asylum plan, we mark 10 years since Theresa May, as Home Secretary, introduced the hostile environment policy. It's important to remember she wasn't the first to use the term hostile environment. In 2007, Tony Blair's immigration minister, Liam Byrne, introduced penalties for employers of, as they call them, illegal immigrants, and said, what we are proposing here will, I think, flush illegal migrants out. We are trying to create a much more hostile environment in this country if you're here illegally. A February 2010 Home Office document, still under a Labour government, also used the phrase. Labour isn't without culpability here for its use of the phrase hostile environment and metaphors such as flush out in relation to people living in the UK. But while Labour used the phrase hostile environment in relation to policy, Theresa May turned it into the white-hot star around which policy revolved. The aim is to create, here in Britain, a really hostile environment for illegal immigrants, she said in 2012. Hostile wasn't enough. Really hostile was what Theresa May was aiming for. Soon after, the coalition government created the Hostile Environment Working Group, which included 12 government departments, including the Minister of State for Care Services, the Minister of State for Schools, and the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Health. Children, the sick, and vulnerable were all among those for whom Theresa May wanted to create a really hostile environment. Let's pause for a moment to remind ourselves that the hostile environment turned schools, universities, and the NHS into arms of the UK Borders Agency, now called ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, by requiring them to collect information on migrant status and share it with the Home Office. What does it do to the fabric of British society if the NHS is required to pass on information to a Home Office as part of a hostile environment policy? What kind of country asks its doctors to spy for government? A cruel one, for starters. A country prepared for the possibility that people in need of medical help wouldn't seek it because they didn't trust their doctors to first do no harm. The cruelty was not incidental, let alone accidental. On the contrary, cruelty towards those who couldn't prove legally valid immigration status became a cornerstone of UK policy. The cruelty continues even while the phrase hostile environment has been officially dropped. And those of us who are consumed by outrage at the most headline-grabbing new iterations of it rarely notice how much of the cruelty has become normalized, to the point that I can read about Omar Saleh and think the word fortunate. To understand the normalization better, it's instructive to go back to 2013 and the government-sponsored billboards on the sides of vans with the message, "In the UK illegally, go home or face arrest." The vans were part of a peculiarly named Operation Varken, which, in the language of government, existed to test whether different communications could encourage any increases in voluntary departures. When reports of the van first became public, there was a heartening singularity of voice condemning the Home Office for its use of language so closely associated with the National Front and far right. Government reports refer to the vans as ad vans, but to the British public they were from the start go home vans. The stench behind that phrase was never going to be something the government could sanitize. The billboards were pulled after a few weeks, with Theresa May saying it was too much of a blunt instrument. The go-home vans were seen as a failure and a humiliation for the government in general and Theresa May in particular. But a closer look reveals something different, and I'm not only referring to the fact that she went on to be Prime Minister. The earliest criticism of the vans faced on the racist language which aligned the government with the violence of the far right in the 70s and 80s. But within a few months, when the government released its first report on the Varkan policy, media outlets started to report the failure of the policy in terms of the numbers of people, 11, who had self-deported as a result of the vans. Phrases such as only 11 people and just 11 people implicitly brought into the government's own reasoning that more deportations means greater success. As soon as you say only 11, you've set aside the argument that it was the campaign itself that was absolutely rotten, regardless of whether it achieved its own aims or not. The opposition was loud in leading the charge to shift the argument. Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, dismissed the vans as a gimmick, which is a very different thing to hammering a government for using the language of the National Front. Incidentally, Yvette Cooper used that word again yesterday about the Rwanda asylum plan, gimmick. Cooper went on to say, it was a disgraceful personal error of judgment by Theresa May. She signed off the vans, the slogans, and the funding. The Home Office must have cheered to hear funding mentioned, given that its own report had figures ready to claim that the total cost of Operation Varkan was £9,740, and the savings incurred by the Varkan-related voluntary removal rather than forced removal was approximately £830,000. Yvette Cooper then said, at the same time, the number of people who were refused entry and then deported has fallen by 46.4%. It is clear that this is a government failing on the fundamentals of illegal immigration. Yvette Cooper and Labour could have taken the outcry against the go-home vans as occasion to attack the language of hostility and racism that the government was using against migrants. But instead, they stepped up the rhetoric that equated a rise in deportation figures with success. What the media didn't tell us about the only 11, or just 11, who had self-deported as a result of the go-home vans was their names, their stories, the circumstances in which they came to England, and the reason they left. Self-deportation wasn't really a story anyone was interested in. It wasn't even a phrase that was used about the 11, with its implication of a human being so beaten down that they take it upon themselves to do the work of the hostile environment rather than endure another day of living in it. Instead, far more anodyne language such as leaving Britain was used, as in the headline in The Independent that said, controversial go-home vans persuaded just 11 illegal migrants to leave Britain. 6 years later, Amelia Gentleman reported the story of Jocelyn John, legally arrived in Britain, aged 4 from Grenada, who lost the passport with the indefinite leave to remain stamp that proved her status. A lost passport shouldn't be anything more than a minor inconvenience, but in Jocelyn John's case, it led to her being classified an illegal immigrant in 2014 and threatened with deportation in letter after letter from the Home Office, despite the 75 pages of evidence she'd gathered to prove she'd spent a lifetime in the UK. She lived for a further 2 years within the hostile environment, unable to work or use public services, until the terror of being shackled and deported and the desperation of being in debt turned her to self-deportation. She described herself as suicidal. The eventual outcry about the stories that came to be known as the Windrush scandal meant that Jocelyn John was finally able to return to the UK and given the right to the passport. Though at the time that Amelia Gentleman was reporting, she still hadn't got a passport because she couldn't afford the passport and citizenship fees. I use the phrase came to be known as the Windrush scandal because scandal is far too mild a term to use about what happened, as Rinka pointed out in a conversation with me not long ago. People lost their homes, were separated from their families, became suicidal, were bankrupted, placed in detention and stripped of all dignity, died far away from home. The Home Office doesn't pull its punches, its critics shouldn't either. Windrush atrocity is closer to the mark. No conversation about the hostile environment can fail to mention the Windrush atrocity, even if that is in the language that's used. The Windrush atrocity made it clear that the illegal immigrants allegedly targeted by the Home Office could mean anyone who can't produce the required documentation, even if they've lived in Britain their whole lives, have families here, and no other country to claim as their own. Or it could even mean anyone who produces more than sufficient documentation to prove their legal status, but still gets turned down by a system that seeks any excuse or any pretense of an excuse to reject them. But returning to the matter of normalization, when we attack the hostile environment by talking only or primarily about the Windrush atrocity, we're allowing May and subsequent Home Secretaries to get away with too much. The deep-rooted problem with the hostile environment policy isn't that it sometimes swept up those who really did have a claim, a legal claim to Britishness. Just as the go-home vans wouldn't have been okay if more people had self-deported, so the hostile environment wouldn't have been okay if someone like Jocelyn John hadn't been caught up in it. Cruelty towards other people as a cornerstone of government policy, that is the deep-rooted problem with the hostile environment. The issue isn't that those other people are sometimes the children of the Windrush generation, are sometimes children, are sometimes fleeing torture, are sometimes doing immense good for the community at large. The issue is that these other people are people. Surely the minimum we should be able to expect of our government is an acknowledgement of human dignity. And now we have the thwarted but not yet defeated removals to Rwanda. The government has learned a little bit from the Windrush atrocity. It's aware that those being threatened with removal might find ways to have their stories told and turn out to be the kinds of people most Britons don't want deported. For instance, the Iranian ex-police commander who refused to shoot protesters in Iran during an anti-government protest, who was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment by a military court and fled the country while out on bail. He was detained on arrival in the UK and rather than having his case for asylum heard, was given notice of removal to Rwanda. The government doesn't want to have to explain why someone like this isn't even having his case for asylum considered, so it keeps repeating the point that its real target is the evil of people smuggling. Those who seek asylum through legal routes won't be removed to Rwanda, the government claims. The outrage and the normalization, this is the pattern we need to break. The outrage has been around the Rwanda removals. The normalization in process now is the one that divides asylum seekers into 2 tiers. Those who enter by safe and legal routes, and all others who are categorized as brought over by people smugglers. On 14th June, the day of the first planned flight to Rwanda, Liz Truss hit back at the bishops and archbishops who had denounced the plan as immoral by saying, "The people who are immoral in this case are the people traffickers trading in human misery. Those people," and she means the bishops and archbishops when she says those people need to suggest an alternative policy that will work. What Liz Truss and every other UK government minister fails to mention is that there are no safe and legal routes for asylum seekers. Even those in allowed from Ukraine have come via an expansion of the family reunion route rather than under an asylum scheme. There is no shortage of people suggesting an alternative policy that will sideline human smugglers. The bishops and archbishops, no friends of human trafficking, restated it bluntly. To reduce dangerous journeys to the UK, we need safe routes. But why would you introduce safe routes if cruelty remains the cornerstone of your policy? Is it too much to hope that criticism of the Rwanda asylum deal will continue to focus on immorality, cruelty, and the breach of international obligations and law, with an increased focus on the need for safe routes? And that if any flights do one day take off, and we really hope they don't, but if they do, we have to hope we won't wake up weeks or months later to headlines telling us that the number of refugees arriving in small boats or lorries have increased or decreased, thereby implicitly accepting those figures as a measure of success. When I hear the phrase hostile environment, I find myself thinking often about a man whose name wasn't John. I met this man via the project Refugee Tales, which pairs up writers with people who've had experience of the UK's asylum system. I listened to his story, which I then went on to write about, but it was made clear to me from the start that when I wrote about it, I wasn't to use the name of the country from which he'd escaped. He'd been tortured and imprisoned in that country and didn't want the government from which he'd escaped to return its attention to him. But he did want me to use his name, his first name. This was a matter of great importance to him, a way of claiming his own story. But just before the story went to press, he had a request. Could I change his name to John? I thought perhaps he was concerned that even his first name would be enough for the government he'd fled to recognize him. But it turned out there was another reason. His asylum claim had been accepted in the UK, but for reasons of a cruel system, he had to reapply every 3 years for a further 15 years before he would be given or would be eligible for indefinite leave to remain. When he told me about his experience of going through the UK's asylum system, he'd merely recounted facts. The closest he came to using critical language was, "The system is a bit, I don't understand it." Now he was afraid that his words might be reason enough for his next application to be rejected. I think often about the man whose name isn't John, and how I couldn't even place his name in his own story because of the hostile environment. Then I think of myself and how very fortunate I've been in my own life and path to UK citizenship. I was never an asylum seeker. I was never under threat of detention. I came to the UK on a visa for writers, artists, and composers, and despite a nasty 12 hours when I discovered that category had been discontinued, was easily able to switch to another visa category, Tier 1. The immigration official who granted my first visa extension was not just human, but kind in dealing with an administrative error regarding my initial visa, and later responded to an email query from me with a PS to say he'd heard me on Radio 4 and I sounded great. But despite all this, until I became a citizen, I didn't write fiction set in contemporary Britain, because the nature of my fiction is such that it can't help but enter the realm of politics, and like the man whose name isn't John, I was afraid that my words might annoy or irritate the wrong person, and my visa extension or citizenship application might be denied. I entered the UK as a resident in 2007, so these concerns of mine predated Theresa May's hostile environment policy. Again, let's remind ourselves, she didn't start that feeling of precariousness around migrant status. She merely blew it up to new proportions. Once I had my passport in 2013, I thought, now I can write. But only weeks after I became a citizen, really I took the timing quite personally, I read an interview with Theresa May in which she signaled her intention to vastly increase the use of citizenship stripping powers and to also expand the pool of Britons against who those powers could be used. We were a year into the hostile environment, and I thought then how foolish it would be to think anyone could be certain of the trajectory that citizenship stripping could take in the next few years. And now we're in the age of Priti Patel that almost makes you want to use the word fortunate for those who entered the country during the age of Theresa May. And Clause 9 of the Nationality and Borders Act makes it possible for the government to strip people of citizenship without even informing them. As a migrant, or even as a child of a migrant, you don't have to have entered the country illegally, or been detained, or had your asylum claim refused, or been issued threatening letters by the Home Office to feel that you might never be entirely and unequivocally secure in your right to go on living in Britain. There are moments, and writing this lecture has been one of them, when I feel the hostile environment inside me as a kernel of fear that will never go away. I'm grateful for that kernel of fear. It brings with it a sense of injustice, a desire for change, a search for the people who'll stand with you. It allows you to cheer on the victories because there are victories all the time. Of course, just this week, we've had the relief of the first Rwanda flight staying grounded. But that is not the lone victory over the last 10 years by any means. Here are just a few. Detained fast track, the system that gave asylum seekers only 7 days to appeal their case, was ruled unlawful in 2015. In 2018, schools stopped collecting information about students' nationalities and place of birth, and in the same year, NHS Digital announced it had stopped sharing data with the Home Office. Last month, the government announced that under-18s who are looked after by local authority will no longer have to pay the £1,012 fee for registration as British citizens, and any child under 18 can apply for a fee waiver. You may not know it, but that new rule went into force today. Just think of it. All those under-18s being looked after by a local authority who today are able to apply for regularization of their status that they couldn't afford yesterday. And there's more. Activists have blocked deportations and deportation flights. Lawyers, often working with organizations that oppose the hostile environment, have secured release orders for so many of those in detention. Those who thought they were alone have discovered they are not alone. Those who thought they had no claim to the rights have discovered their rights. Those rights lead to housing, to welfare benefits, to community care. I'm talking specifically about the works of migrants organized here. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge its core ethos, which is in its name. Migrants organize. We don't need to be saved. We need to come together. Behind all the victories I've mentioned, there are campaigners and organizers and activists. Let no one refer to any of their victories as small victories. Each one of them transforms lives. And I'd like to give the last words to Adrian Rich, because why not? What would it mean to live in a city whose people were changing each other's despair into hope? You yourself must change it. What would it feel like to know your country was changing? You yourself must change it. Though your life felt arduous, new and unmapped and strange, what would it mean to stand on the first page to the end of despair? Thank you.
Whoa, thank you, Kamila. Although I read it a few days ago, it's still giving me goosebumps now hearing it for the first time. And it feels like you went into my head and saw that little kernel of fear that I still have after nearly 30 years in this country. But I too will now be grateful for it and look at it differently, because fear keeps us safe and prepared to speak out against injustice, and it keeps us organizing together for dignity and for justice. And that work is going on all the time. So thank you again, Kamila. So one of the challenges that we have in our work is that we come across so many good people who do good work quietly. And now we have invited some of those people who are doing the good work of organizing and speaking out against the hostile environment to share their experiences of resilience and resistance. So while they come onto the stage and switch their mics on, please do come. I'll just introduce the chair. So Lorraine and Erfan and Marjana and Nanu, could you please come and take your seats? And Marjana is going to chair this session, and so she's going to introduce, and they're going to be introducing themselves, but while they're fiddling with mics, I just want to say that Marjana Zukowska is co-director of Polish Migrants Organized for Change, POMOC, in the UK, and is now Liverpool-based organizer, although still not a Liverpool supporter as far as I understand, so I don't know how that's going to work out. And she's been working for more than a decade now for leading social and cultural movements in the US and now in the UK. Marjana co-leads the Radical Communicators Network and is one of Migrants Organized's trustees. And she also brings a personal experience of being a migrant and growing up undocumented as a migrant in the US. So thank you, Marjana, and take it away.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? It's so surreal. I feel like I can't hear myself in this, but you know, I'm going to trust all of you that you can hear me. So thank you, Zrinka, for that introduction. It was really incredible to hear Kamila Shamsie speaking and tracing that lineage of the really hostile environment for over a decade for us as it's ravaged our communities. I think this week in particular has been very painful. We have seen multiple court appeals denied, trying to challenge the government's toxic RWANDA plan. And we've also seen elected officials spewing a lot of ugly, violent, and frankly hypocritical language that has reframed what the RWANDA plan actually means for this country and for the people who are impacted by it. But it's also been a week of really incredible collective strength, because all across the country we've seen communities hosting informational stalls, art builds, creative actions, blocking deportation flights, running trainings on anti-raids, all part of the Solidarity Knows No Borders week of action, right? We saw Simba Mujekachi's 100,000-pound debt to the NHS wiped completely clean, right? And on Tuesday, we saw the first Rwanda flight halted because of people power, right? I think this government thinks that we're defenseless, that it can control our bodies and our futures. But like the title of this panel says, our resilience is our resistance. And I'm so honored and privileged to be on this panel with these activists who, this is the front line of the resistance, right? And it's like Zrinka said, it's doing the work day to day to organize. So I'm so excited to introduce all of you. And I'm going to take some time with these introductions because they're really, really important, right? So we've got Erfan, who is the former resident of the Napier Barracks, who started organizing and campaigned to raise not only his voice, but others' voices, right? People who were detained in the camps and stuck in the asylum system. We've got Lorraine Mopanella, who came to the UK from Malawi as a student in 2008 after completing her postgraduate degree in public health at the University of Leeds, right? And due to a change in her circumstances, she has been stuck in the asylum system ever since. She started organizing in 2016 as soon as she moved to Coventry and is now the ex-chair of the Coventry Asylum and Refugee Action Group, CARIG, which is doing incredible work day to day. But Lorraine has many, many credentials, and she's also the board member for Women for Refugee Women and the Asylum Support Appeals Project. And she also chairs the Status Now for All network, and was awarded in 2020 the Everyday Hero Award by the Coventry City of Culture 2021 for her voluntary work during the pandemic, which she's going to outline for us. And then we've got, to my right, Nanu Tasinda, who is a migrant justice campaigner and organizer. She has been seeking protection in the UK for 7 years. Nanu has facilitated the migrant women's rights group at Migrants Organize for the last 2 years. This is an incredible peer support group involving more than 90 migrant and refugee women. And Nanu is also active member of the Abolishing Reporting campaign, fighting to end mandatory reporting for migrants and refugees, which she'll also talk to us about. Okay, let's dig into the questions. So I have some individual questions for everyone, and then we're gonna answer a couple together. So Irfan, I want to start with you. So you've spoken a lot about your experiences of survival at the Napier Barracks, right? A place where the basic rights of individuals who were there were completely deprived. And also you've talked about being virtually reduced to a number, and that being a dehumanizing impact and the kind of impact that's had on your life. But you not only persevered, but you organized inside the camp, and you led so many incredible and creative actions. So my question to you is, how did you manage to organize so many protests and actions inside the camp, and really what sustained you over the 4 months that you were there?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you for the introduction. If anyone here was present in the previous summit of Migrants Organized when I was talking, I would say that when I was moved to Napier Barracks, I was completely indifferent and unaware about the situation, about the politics of the UK, about the immigration system. And it comes to the point when you live it, when you feel it, and then when you're affected, you feel, oh, there is something wrong. And as I said in that previous summit, it was anger that motivated me, that pushed me forward to take action. And that anger, I think when you're angry, you have to express that anger at some point in different ways. Mm-hmm. And my way was to express it in a way to reveal that kind of the shamefulness or disgrace of the hostile environment. And I think that was the main reason, main cause. Mm-hmm.
Amazing. And can you talk a little bit about some of the actions that you hosted and that you led and kind of participated in
Definitely,
the camps?
yeah. First of all, before going into detail about what was happening in Napier Barracks, I have to tell, a few weeks ago I was attending an AGM meeting for another organization, and I was talking about my experience, what had been going on in Napier Barracks. And by the end of it, so many of attendees came to me and expressed their empathy and that how sad it was. And it's really kind of them to show me that they are really sympathetic. But at some point it makes me uncomfortable because this is not the point I want to raise to make people sad. In fact, I personally feel really empowered when I talk about my experience in Napier Barracks, because when you fight back, when you reveal something that is ugly, that the shamefulness and the disgrace of the hostile environment, you should be proud of yourself. And every one of us should be proud of ourselves doing that. Thank you. When I was moved to Napier Barracks, it was in October 2020. And I was completely shocked by seeing the facade of the camp. I couldn't believe it. It was totally looked like a prison, surrounded by barbed wire fences, and then there was around 12 to 13 blocks, and each block was used to accommodate 42 to 44 people. And each block had only 2 toilets and 2 showers, so there was no privacy, there was no, in regard to hygiene, it was completely poor. So, as I said, I was really indifferent. I wasn't really active when I was moved to Napier Barracks. So what I did, the first thing I did was to give a feedback to the camp manager and call the migrant help and say, are you aware of the conditions of the camp? And they said, yeah, but it's only going to be for a month. And I said, okay, a month, I can bear it, that's fine. And after a month, I realized, no, this is not the case because people had been here for a few months, even longer. And then at that point, I realized, okay, they were completely responsive, the migrant help, the camp manager, the staff. So you weren't in a position to anticipate when you're gonna move out, what's gonna happen next. And you were in a kind of limbo in a really horrible conditions of that kind of accommodation. And I think it was during, but I always have been a calm person. And I think at some point when the COVID outbreak happened in the camp and it was spreading like a wildfire and infected so many people, including me. And it was obvious that during the pandemic, that place is not safe in protecting the residents and individuals. But what really made me angry, made me furious, was that because I was active on Twitter and Instagram, and I was reading the tweets of Priti Patel and the then Minister of Immigration, Chris Philip, saying that the COVID outbreak happening in the camp is the asylum seekers' fault because they couldn't protect themselves from the pandemic. They didn't wear masks. I have to say that there was a communal area which we had to have our meals, and we used to share that communal area with more than 100 people. And when you are eating, obviously you can't wear masks. So that really made me furious because people were not aware of the situation and conditions in the camp, and they were spreading misinformation and disinformation. They were using this opportunity, this unawareness of the public to spread misinformation. And I thought, okay, I have to do something because people don't know what's happening here. People think that we are living in comfortable rooms, having our comfortable area like the other soldiers in the country. I have to say that Napier Barracks, I mean, most of you must know that Napier Barracks hadn't been used for 14 years for soldiers, so it was completely damped. And I decided to write a letter explaining the conditions of the camp, what had been happening, and how we feel, who are the people inside, and how we've been treated. And I wrote it in 2 languages. One of my friends who could speak Arabic translated it into Arabic, then I wrote English and Persian. And then what we did, that we went to each block one by one, explaining the content of the letter. And we could see out of 400 residents, 200 residents, more than 200 residents came forward to sign the letter. And we had like 7 or 8 pages of signatures. And then because we could kind of communicate when we were in the camp, sometimes you could see journalists outside of the camp. And we had our communications. And then we could, at some point, share the letters and the signatures with some journalists, and it was on so many newspapers and media, and we could see that people were really shocked because they couldn't believe that this is happening in the UK, and some were close to them. And I think that was the beginning of the activism, and I realized that people are really unaware of what is happening, and that should be one of the main things that we should do, to inform people. Because what we are seeing, the hostile environment that we are seeing, is the consequence of decades of misinformation. So we have to fight back by informing people, and I think that was the beginning of it.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Irfan, and also your kind of strategies and ways of kind of leading the resistance on the inside. Nanu, I want to go to you next because you've also worked on an issue that not only has the government spread misinformation about, but something that a lot of people don't know very much about, which is reporting. And when I listened to when I first heard your story, I was on the Still We Rise podcast that Carrig hosts, which is incredible if you have the opportunity. If you want to hear from the people who are on the front lines of the resistance, definitely listen to this podcast. And what I was blown away by, Nanu, is how actually similar the reporting system within the US immigration system is to what exists in the UK, which really speaks to the fact that the hostile environment is global. And so what I'd love for you to talk about is, how you got involved with the Abolish Reporting campaign and maybe some of your proudest achievements with it.
Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Because my microphone
Yes, sir.
is far from me. I don't have a pocket. I always have a lot to say, but I always have 4 or 3 minutes they give me. So I don't know where to start, but I will start from somewhere where people can understand what asylum seekers and migrants go through the system that is broken in this country. The Abolish Reporting campaign is more focused on the reporting condition that the immigration system of this country have put a bell on, let's say, asylum seekers and refugees in this country. What always blowing my mind is I myself, I am an asylum seeker, and I've been in those centers to report, and I've seen what people go through in those kind of centers. Is unbelievable the way this immigration system create the policy that is based on ruining people's life. It is unbelievable. The reason I was involved in the Abolish Reporting campaign is because I was there. I've seen everything people go through. I can't explain everything, but I'll manage myself and try to let you as a community know what people go through, and then maybe you can join us and fight for this, the good fight. We're fighting for this to stop, because it's a very big hostile environment that they put on people. And this creates, people are traumatized, people are stressed, and the very big issue is that people have mental health when they have this condition of reporting. So reporting, they call it bail condition. When they send you, so when you claim asylum in this country, you will receive a letter from the Home Office. They changed it to call it a bail not long time ago. Before it was just a letter for reporting. So now it's a bail condition on a person that's seeking protection in this country. The first time I received the letter, I tried to think in my head, when somebody is on bail, mean the person is a criminal. So I asked myself a question: what did I do wrong to receive a bail condition? I asked the people at the center when I received the letter to explain to me what bail meant. They told me I should go and Google it and understand. That is very criminal. And sometimes they think I don't want to talk about it because it affects me or it makes me sad. But the reason I joined this campaign is because I wanted to speak up. I wanted to raise my voice, and maybe people can hear to my voice and they can come to rescue, they can help us. It's not easy for somebody to tell the story. But I think in this hostile environment that we are in, we need to speak up. We need to talk. We need to talk to people. We need to tell them what we go through, as my colleague here said. Because when we are in this situation, nobody knows what we go through. And when I say that the big problem is the people have mental health, they create it. And then they leave organization like charitable organization, example of migrant organized, to pick the pieces and fix people. And we think this must stop. enough is enough. 2 years of hostile environment is a lot on people's life. So that's the main reason I think I joined the Abolish Reporting Center. And I would like to add something, because when you go to the reporting center, they treat us like inhuman. We are not, we don't exist. They talk to us in the way that they can't talk to the human. I've seen it. You can see that's the most important thing always trigger my head. I saw a pregnant woman. She must be maybe 8.5 months pregnant in a queue, queuing for hours for them to open the door and for us to get in. This poor woman wanted to go in the loo. She begged them, can somebody please open the door? I just want to use the toilet. They say to her, they can't open, she have to find somewhere else. So I think this kind of situation is inhuman. And we think in this report, in this campaigning, reporting condition is unnecessary. Because when we go to those reporting centers, there's nothing that we do that is important. We go there, they call your name, and you present in front of them. They ask, your name is Nano? Yes. Do you live in the same address? You have the same phone number? Okay, bye. We will contact you again next week. So why do we have to go and report? I think it's a very big issue on hostile environment, because it damages people's life. I thought I have to stand up and raise my voice and tell my story. That way, I can maybe help other people out there that don't tell their story to be helped by our community.
Thank you so much, Nanu. That was actually the simplest explanation of reporting I've ever heard anyone give, so you did an amazing job. So Lorraine, I want to go to you next. So one thing I learned about Lorraine recently is she's a mean Scrabble player. So in addition to being one of the top organizers in the country, she is also amazing at a lot of other things. So what I wanted to ask you about is housing specifically, because during the COVID-19 pandemic, you were really on the front lines of helping some of the most vulnerable communities in Coventry be able to access housing. And Zrinka tipped me off that you're running a really, really radical housing project. Could you tell us a little bit about why homes, why housing, why access to accommodation became so critical for the communities you work with?
Yeah. Thank you, Mazena, and I'm so honored to share the platform with these two amazing organizers. Yeah, I'm Lorraine. I'm from Coventry Asylum and Refugee Action Group, in short, CALAG. CALAG is made up of asylum seekers, refugees, and migrants living in Coventry. We meet weekly, we share food, we also support each other as in peer support if someone wants to go to hospital and they're not confident, and then we support each other. It's for us and by us. So before the pandemic, we had conversations around the problems that we have. So we mentioned a number of things, including lack of access to solicitors, including homelessness, which is a huge problem in our group. Many of us, we are people who are homeless. So there was a time, I think around 2018, migrant organized, Zrinka, Maimuna, and others, they came to CALAG, they were teaching us about organizing, and they said, out of all the problems that you have mentioned that are in CALAG, if you pick one, what would that be? We said homelessness, because yes, solicitors is the issue. They help us to sort our papers, but you can only sort your papers when you have the right mind, when you have a place to live, and then you can put your documents together. So we came up with the homeless to deal with homelessness as the main problem. So they helped us, the migrant organized team helped us to come up with like action plan and all of that. So part of the action plan was, the first thing was to do a research around people who have no recourse to public funds, the form of accommodations that are available. So we started that research just before the pandemic, and then the pandemic came before we even produced a report. Majority of members a good significant number of members, Kalag members at that time were living in a night shelter, and yes, there was everybody in policy, they were put in a hotel, but not everyone was housed at the time. Also in the middle of the pandemic, we found that some people, for some smaller reasons, they were being made homeless because you didn't sign this document, therefore leave, because you were not here last night, therefore leave, because this, therefore leave. So we saw the need for housing even more urgent. So during that time, there was also a funding that came up, resourcing racial justice. We thought we could apply for this. We applied for £30,000 and we were given it. We thought this is it, so we can house the people that are homeless again in the midst of the pandemic. We put a tweet out looking for a house to rent, and then a lot of landlords came back and gave us options. So at the moment, we have one house that we rent. This house started, we call it Kalag Housing Foundation. It started in October 2020 at the height of the pandemic, but it's still running. It's a 5-bed house, and the residents get £40 a week for food, access to legal support, and a room. That was happening while we were also dealing with so many things. The people that were moved from a night shelter into a sort of, it wasn't a hotel, it was like a house that was unoccupied. So when they were moved there was no access to kitchen. So we also had to start a project which we called Right to a Meal project. We were providing 1 meal per day so that people can still have a meal. Although they were getting a few allowances there, this £5 thing that they get, but if you can't cook, you still miss a hot meal and stuff. And because the other places where you could go and maybe have other things, like they were also closed. So we're providing 1 meal a day. And this was done with another organization called Inini Initiative. So Inini Initiative, they support Kalag members to do with mental health. But the lady who runs it, she said she can provide her kitchen and cook from there. So Kalag was mainly fundraising for the cooking throughout the pandemic. That started just as soon as possible, March 2020, and we stopped just recently when the last member that we were supporting passed away, unfortunately. Yeah, so we also have the Still We Rise podcast that Mazena just mentioned, which I encourage all of you to listen to. It's on our website, kalag.co.uk, where we tell our stories. And yeah, we still campaign, like you've heard, a co-chair for Status Now for All campaign, which is a campaign that is calling for indefinite leave to remain for everyone who is stuck in the system, failed by the system, or people who are undocumented. So there's a lot to do, and I hope what we have said or what we are saying will inspire also some of you maybe to do something in your area, because if we can do it, as we are saying, we are asylum seekers, but because we didn't have a choice, we saw the need and we started doing something. Maybe yourselves, you can also do something where you are.
I have absolutely no idea how we're doing on time, but I know it's probably not on our side. So I wanted to do a quick go around, and maybe, to Lorraine's last point is for each of you to say, what's your call to action, or what advice do you have to people who are just starting to get involved, who want to get involved, don't know how to take the first step? What tips as seasoned organizers would you give?
To me? Oh,
yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I know you said, are we running out of the time, or we still have time?
We'll watch Zrinka, and if she starts to give us the eye, then we will
okay.
make our way off the stage.
Because I think there's something very important that I forgot to say on my first question that you asked. I think you asked me what was the success on the campaigning we're doing. I think we've been succeeded because nobody knew, not many people knew what's going on with the reporting condition. And we did raise an awareness. People now know. So this campaigning is not just in London. It's going on in Coventry, in Liverpool, in Manchester, and different places in the UK. for people to get to understand and know kind of treatment that we get from the system of the immigration in this country. So I think that is a very big thing that we did so far, because now people can talk about it, people get to understand about it. Before it was when I'm explaining to somebody, I'm going reporting. They ask me, what is that, Nano? Reporting, explain. I think now that we've been talking about it, I can give explanation, but people get to understand what is the reporting is. So they treat us as criminal, but we are not criminal. We are seeking protection, not punishment. But we feel like they punish us. For the tip, for people who would like to organize or join us to help, there is not a miracle. The miracle is just our voice. We have to stand up, speak up when we have a chance. We see somebody, we have to spread what we know. People have to know what's going on in the system. Because if we don't help ourselves, nobody will help us. I think I never been a speaker before. I didn't have the courage to sit in front of the people and start speaking. But I think it's one of the things that made me speak up, because I've seen a lot. I've seen people going through a lot. The group of women that I work with in Migrant Organize, they have similar problem as myself. We come together as a family, sisters, we share everything. Sometimes when they tell me their story, I always think that I had more problem than them. And then you listen to people's story, you have mind-blowing. And during the COVID, we were doing this, we always do our session on Zoom. The thing that I see those women coping with those who have children, you have to have this big heart not to cry. But I always tell them that, you know, women, we are like a very strong tree. When there's a very strong wind comes, we might go a bit in one side, and when the rain finish, we'll raise up again. So for us to raise up, we need to stand up and speak up. If somebody here today who like to organize, you just have to be resistant. You just have to insist on what you want. You have to have hope. You have the people that you want to work with, you need to tell them that we might not win today, tomorrow is another day. I know there will be there will be people discouraging us. There will be people telling us that you will never win because they have power. The bad guys, they have power. We don't have the power to make policy that they do make, but we have our voice. Our voice is our power. And with our voice, I am sure we can win.
That resonated so much with me, Nanu, because at Pomoc, where we organize largely Polish women and gender nonconforming people, half the battle is just making people see that what they're going through is not in isolation, that it's actually part of something bigger. And it's getting over that hurdle. Once you're over that hurdle and people see, actually, I do have something I can contribute, I have a role to play in this, the rest is just, you know, being in the right place at the right time for a protest. But Irfan, I wanted to go to you. What's your call to action? What do you want people to know? What are your tips for people to get involved?
I think I really believe in the power of word of mouth, and I also love myth busting. So I think it seems simple, but it has a really powerful effect. So reach out to your friends, relatives, or people around you and talk about this and raise awareness. And if you have access to kind of any asylum seekers or refugees or any person who is stuck in the hostile environment, be a connection between them and social workers, healthcare workers, and other people who can help them. And that would be great because so many these people are powerless, voiceless, so they really can, and they can't speak the language, most of them. So this means a lot to them. Also, one point I want to raise is that what we are seeing is the powerful classifying and categorizing some people based on their immigration status or nationality. So if you think that this is not going to happen to me, unfortunately you're wrong, because if they can do that, they can discriminate you based on your gender, your race, or other things. So if you're not in hostile environment, don't think that you are safe or assisted. Yeah.
That's incredibly powerful. Thank you, Irfan. And then Lorraine?
Yeah, so if we have people who are seeking asylum in here and in your area, you don't have a group like CALAG, I would encourage you to start it. Because I know when I went to Coventry at the beginning as an asylum seeker, because I was moved there as an asylum seeker, I didn't have the courage. Actually, I wanted to hide because of the shame that asylum seeking comes with. But when I was introduced to CALAG, all that shame went because I saw people who are empowered. So I would encourage everyone, if you're an asylum seeker, please start the group or join if there is a group for asylum seekers like this. If there isn't in your area, where we are, CALAG was started by a Nigerian man, but he was supported by the local community. So it's you as a local community in solidarity, you can initiate things like that by supporting people who are seeking asylum so that they can also stand on their own and start campaigning and talking. But also reaching out to other people so that we don't do it alone, because we know the road is long, so we're gonna need everybody to win. Thank you.
This is why we will win. Thank you so much, Lorraine and Irfan and Nanu, and what a wonderful moderator we had in Marjana tonight. You will be back by popular demand. Thank you for doing that. There is an alternative to this system that's been made for us. We can actually make it differently, and we already are coming up with one. It's called the Firm Charter. And everyone can do something. So you can bring another person to the conversation, and these are all very relational, proper organizers, so you see how it's done. And I just wanted to close with a message that we got yesterday, I think after the Rwanda action. It said, "Hi there, I'm now in my 70s, and I have always been disabled, so I really can't manage protests, marches, etc. anymore. But I wrote the attached poem and performed it at an event last Saturday, sponsored by Reading Refugee Support Group. It was very well received, with the audience joining." So you can write a poem. You can write a song. We had another member of the network, Father Luke, who actually wrote a poem as well last week. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you to Kamila. Thank you to all our panel members. And as we've heard in the film, and that's been our rallying cry this year, and today is also, as it is, International Domestic Workers' Day, and Bloomsday. That's why all sorts of weird things are happening today. It's also the anniversary of Soweto uprising, when 20,000 students in 1976 rebelled against the introduction of Afrikaans into their schools, and 176 were killed. And that day today, in today's South Africa, is celebrated as a Youth Day. So one day, this hostile environment lecture and this day will be celebrated as a Solidarity Day. Thank you.